I'd like to talk to you about anchors. I've lived considerably longer than I expected, and I've acquired several diseases along the way. I'm fortunate to know that I will die fairly soon and have the opportunity to say thank you and goodbye to those whom I love. I will first share the experience of one of my family members, and her love was passing. I found her story touching. She wrote, "Since Tom related how he felt about dying, I wanted to share my story. Farrell, my late husband, had two near-death experiences. The first occurred in January 2018 when he had an anaphylactic shock after ingesting an anti-inflammatory drug that I begged him not to take. He had a ridiculously high blood pressure at the time and was asking for trouble. When the incident happened, I boiled with anger, even when he had been resuscitated in the ER. The second time was the 19th of December 2019. We had returned from the doctor and he passed out on the bed after telling me he was dying. I sobbed and pleaded with God. He was wet from my tears. He didn't appear to be breathing and then suddenly just gasped and sat up. I wanted to call paramedics, but he refused. Tests and scans later revealed that he had suffered an aortic aneurysm. A vein on the aorta had completely bled out. I was convinced that it was the end of his troubles and all that was needed was recuperation. But his condition deteriorated until tests in mid-January revealed the cancer. The night before he died was so amazing. He had been struggling to pass urine, but passed almost 15 liters of water. He seemed renewed and positive. We prayed and sang, and he chatted to folks on the phone. It was the first night in months that both of us slept soundly. We had to go to the hospital in the morning to get biopsy test results to see what stage the cancer was in. He jokingly kicked me to get up and get ready. As he got into the bath, he urgently needed the toilet. Whilst on the toilet, he became restless. He didn't want me to touch him. By 5, his whole abdomen was heaving and twisting in weird ways, and he began sweating profusely. He asked me to lay him down on the floor. I couldn't, so I managed to guide him onto the office chair that we had been using as a wheelchair and wedged him into the corner with a wicker basket stand, preventing him from falling over. I can't explain the realization that this was the end. I asked God for mercy, begging God to allow Farrell to live. But then I knew this was it. Farrell was muttering, "Please God." From deep within, the prayer was on my lips. The Bible says the Holy Spirit prays for us when we are unable. I could hear myself. I do the words, "Lord, please let your holy angels guard and protect Farrell and guide him to your bosom." Suddenly a calm came over me. I'm not sure how else to explain this, but I believed I was standing on holy ground. Farrell clung to me and we both whispered, "I love you." At one point his nails were digging into the flesh of my arm. Then he was gone. I'm not sure how else to explain this, but I believed I was standing on holy ground. Farrell clung to me and we both whispered, "I love you." At one point his nails were digging into the flesh of my arm. Then he was gone, although he still continued to breathe for a while. I know that I cannot offer any proof that heaven exists. In my heart of hearts, I know that this is where Farrell is right now. P.S. My phone was in my nightgown pocket, and I realized under normal circumstances, I would have called paramedics at the first sign of trouble. My son owned an ambulance service, and help arrived in minutes. Farrell expelled his last breath in their presence. He was just one of her anchors. I strongly recommend building anchors into your life, for this will give you a richness and a depth to your life If you suffer an illness that pushes you toward death, then I strongly recommend that you find what I call anchors. Anchors are those things that pull you to life, and they vary from person to person. I will give you examples of anchors I have in my life. Some of them are deeply personal. My siblings, especially my brother Chris, who has always had my back, have been an important part of my childhood. The time is short, so they will be mentioned only here. You may question my logic as you hear my story. Remember, I was operating for mental illness most of the time. These are my anchors, and they are not for everyone. You can find your own. I've often been reminded that we not have chosen our biological family, but we can always adopt a new one. I also recommend that you can seek some of your anchors. I believe the more anchors you have, the more powerful your pull toward life. My eldest. For me, it began with personal pride. Pride is based in fear, a weak anchor. Nevertheless, it is helpful if you have no better tool. I had a few anchors growing up that I will not go into because of need for brevity. But then came the birth of my firstborn daughter, whom I had the honor of delivering at home. I was a volunteer EMT with two friends who were physicians who walked me through the process a number of times. I also had a friend who lived up the street who was an RN and was present at the birth. She helped me stay on track as I delivered my child. I have to admit that the most courageous person in the room was my wife at the time, who allowed me to deliver our child at home. I remember as she crowned and then turned as she came out, I experienced what I can only describe as consciousness of the Creator and the wonder of the universe. My eldest daughter was one of the amazing anchors of my life. Just being in her presence was a constant reminder of the miraculous. One occasion where she pulled me into life, I was in an especially bad depressive episode. I was drinking heavily, and I hit the point where I was ready to kill myself, despite my personal pact. I decided to use my shotgun to be certain I would die, and felt at peace with it. My wife and my daughter were visiting her parents, so it seemed like a good time. Then it occurred to me that when my wife came home, my daughter would be faced with this grisly scene. It would have a horrific impact on her life. I couldn't let her see that, so I decided to call someone to get it cleaned up. I didn't want to call the police because they could get there too quickly, and I had not finished my drink. Next to my armchair, I had a pile of papers with names and numbers on them from 12-step group members. So I called the first person and asked her to send the police in about an hour. She asked me why. I told her I was going to kill myself and didn't want my daughter to see my corpse. Then she asked me why I was going to kill myself. And since I was fairly buzzed, I told her my story and my wish for peace. 2 hours of talking later, she asked me if I still wanted to kill myself. I replied, no, I'm too tired, and wanted to go to sleep. Besides, I thought, how do you leave a message for your child saying, sorry, my child, but I didn't have the skills to help you? She asked me to do two things. Go to a 12-step meeting every day and get a 12-step sponsor as my guide. I agreed to do as she suggested since I didn't have any better ideas. Then I thought I could survive anything for a month. That decision put my whole life on a different path. My daughter gave me a much stronger anchor, as did the 12-step community. I could not leave my daughter worse off than I was growing up. She is now the mother of my 3 grandchildren. Talk about anchors. Grandchildren are powerful. After 11 years, my marriage, which had always been on shaky ground, came to an end. I met my current wife, my mate and partner, through some friends and a buddy that was always hitting on her. On one occasion, my buddy was not around, and I felt someone grip my elbow from behind. I wasn't accustomed to being grabbed out of the blue. I jumped and turned around, and I saw this gorgeous woman that my buddy had been hitting on. Full disclosure, I had a huge crush on her. She asked me out for coffee, and I told her I would love to. While we were at Waffle House drinking coffee, she turned to me and said, I know you're gay, but I find myself really attracted to you. And I couldn't help but laugh and asked her, Why does everybody think I'm gay? Turns out it was because I dressed with some sort of sophisticated sense of fashion other than the style common in the area of the country. Also, I spoke with what might be called a cultured accent, or what I call an accent of birth. About 3 years later, she and I went to South Africa with a tour of Zimbabwe, which has some amazing sights. From Kariba Dam, where we had a private tour with a game ranger involving animal viewing at night, and Victoria Falls, where I had visited a few times growing up. On our way back to the States, we were over the Atlantic near the equator, and I had been thinking about the month we'd spent together, that we had constantly been in each other's company. The whole time had been wonderful. So I turned to my partner and I told her what I'd been thinking. And then I asked her to marry me. When she said yes, I felt a strong boost in my heart. We recently celebrated 37 years. We've had our ups and downs, and make no mistake, the tough times have been tough. Somehow our love grew over time. Would not envision a better mate for my life. If you can allow yourself to work through the tough times with your partner, you'll find you have a true gem. She is my most powerful anchor. After my wife and partner, my next anchor was my son. He's an amazing child. My wife and I used to chuckle when he was young because while he was sleeping, he would tell jokes to Spider-Man. Then he would, and presumably Spider-Man would laugh at the jokes. When he was in middle and high school, he was constantly getting into trouble for not handing in his homework. It wasn't because he hadn't done the homework, because he always had. It was always in his backpack. He just decided that it was the best time to go to the bathroom, so he missed handing it in. He had a penchant for at the last minute saying no to loading up into the car to see his grandparents. It would take a full 10 minutes of discussion, not argument, before he would load up. He always loved visiting his grandparents, and on the way home he would recount all the fun he had at his grandparents by the lake. He also has the benefit of having wonderful friends he has known since middle school, who when they can give him a break from the family. My son, as I've already mentioned, is battling his third round of cancer since age 19. I couldn't describe for you the agony he has been through over the last 13 years. Most people who have Hodgkin's lymphoma have a 94% cure rate. For my young man, the treatments failed. He went through every standard treatment in his first battle against cancer. However, he went from stage 2 to stage 4 during that time. He then had a stem cell transplant using his own cells. Unfortunately, this failed as well. The result was his cancer spread to a number of other areas of his body, as it no longer treated the cancer cells as abnormal cells. Then he became the recipient of a new class of drugs known as biologics, which directly attacked the Hodgkin's lymphoma cells. These were incredibly effective at destroying those cells, which made him able to have a successful second stem cell transplant. They asked our youngest daughter if she'd be willing to test her blood to see if she would be close enough match to her brother. She turned out to be a 10-point match, which apparently is an excellent match. She went through a very painful process to boost her stem cell count. Her donation was very effective, leaving her brother with no active cancer spots. 9 years later, he is back in his battle with cancer. His life has been seriously disrupted. Can you imagine your entire life being put on hold when you're at the age where you're starting your independent adult life? That is only the beginning of his challenges. My youngest daughter came 13 months after her brother and 10 years after her older sister. My children are part of the 9/11 generation. They all bring something wonderful to our family. I have endeavored to be a better parent than my father. I can't say I was the best father, rather I wanted to be a better father to my children. I've worked my whole life to be a kinder man, which brings its own challenges. My two youngest, especially my daughter, I believe, got the best of my maturity as a man. My eldest child was the child of my divorce. My youngest two have seen the ups and downs of our marriage and watched us work through them. My two youngest have only memories of me being disabled since they were ages 1 and 2. starting with my spinal cord injury. My youngest daughter, rather than be the typical spoiled child, has shown an amazing maturity in how she approaches life. I was able to give her the best principles that I use in my life. First, when experiencing depression or anxiety, remember how you feel has no relationship with your reality, and it will pass. And second, Rule 62, taught to me by my friends in 12-step program. Don't take yourself too damn seriously. A very effective method of taking pride out of the situation, helping you achieve a more peaceful resolution. From my wife, she learned Mom says no, which she and a friend had tattooed on their legs as a way of deflecting unwanted attention. She was asking questions about why we couldn't just buy something she wanted when she was in middle school. She started learning about budgeting at that early age. She would frequently challenge us until she understood why we made that decision. All the way through high school, she would come to us for advice about something in her life. Then she began trusting her own judgment. She has had good results, and she will be direct when someone is trying to deceive her, as well as a kind and compassionate person when she believes it is needed. All this has made her a wonderful customer service gem. With all of this, she is a compassionate, kind person. The injection she had to get over 2 weeks to boost her stem cell growth for the transplant to her brother were extremely painful. After 5 years in remission, they each got the date tattooed on the backs behind their hearts. She is a very loyal friend with those who appreciate her direct approach and dark humor. She has become a lifesaver for us over the last few years. She struggles to have some normalcy in her life, which is difficult considering much of her free time is spent helping taking care of me. Fortunately, she has wonderful, loyal friends that try to give her some breaks from the stress. I cannot tell you how amazed I am by my children and grandchildren. I've been blessed with a family I never thought I could have.